This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast, where we look at our times and our generation through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. So glad to have you with me. Let's dive in. I want to start this podcast by recommending a book, and the book is really the title of everything that we're going to talk about in this episode. It's a book by Barbara Tuchman, Tuchman. She's one of my favorite historians, not an academic historian, not a PhD, but a brilliant researcher and writer. She's passed away now, but she really was formulative in my development as a historian, and I want to recommend her works highly. The one I want to recommend related to what we're talking about in this episode is the March of Folly. It's a look at how governments make foolish decisions, how governments stumble into wars, how folly is a factor in history, especially recent generations. And that's what I want to talk about because right now, I think it's very possible that the United States is stumbling into a nuclear war with Russia. Now that sounds dramatic and I'm not one to make, predictions with my hair on fire. I'm pretty calm, pretty level-headed. Don't like the folks who, raise money for their organizations or get elected by telling everybody the sky is falling. I am not Chicken Little. However, some decisions are being made right now that could take the Ukraine war that's been going on for 2 years and ratchet it up to a whole other level that could lead us into literal nuclear war between Russia and the United States. All of you know that we've been at war. However, Ukraine has been at war with Russia for about 2 years. You know that this came about because Vladimir Putin moved on the Ukraine. And you also know that his allegation is that NATO, largely the U.S., tried to put long-range missiles into Ukraine. This was an aggressive act. It gave him a pretext for saying that NATO had caused this war, and he has since been pouring into Ukraine. As you know, it's not gone well for Russia. They have lost many troops. Their economy is tanking. Some of that, of course, is because of the sanctions against them by the Western world. And they just haven't done well militarily. They weren't as equipped, as is often the case with Russia. When they go to war, they're not as well equipped, they're not as well prepped, their troops are not as well trained as others. And so Ukraine, which spends 10% of what Russia spends on arms and prepping its military, has actually been holding Russia at bay. Ukraine has lost some territory. They have lost lives because Russia is willing to bombard civilian installations. There have been a lot of civilian deaths. Nevertheless, Ukraine is holding its own. 10% of the Russian population, 10% of the expense that Russia exhausts on military preparation. Now, what's happened recently has a lot to do with Joe Biden. And even though he's in the last 10 weeks of his presidency, the fact is that both because he dislikes Donald Trump and because I think he may genuinely believe in what he's doing, he is about to leave office, setting up the U.S. for what could very well be a nuclear war. He may be right, he may be wrong, but there's no question that his attitude towards Trump and the fact that he'd like to queer the deal for Trump as he steps into the presidency is part of the factor here. Because here's what's happened. What you need to know as background is that Russia has begun to deploy North Korean troops along the Ukrainian border. North Korea offered them. There have been some conversations between the North Korean premier and Putin. And so they have become closer allies. And geographically, it's all very close over there as you look at the map. And so now North Korean troops from the strange kingdom of North Korea now align the northern Ukraine border, which basically means they're on the border between Russia and Ukraine. Well, because of that move, Joe Biden now has approved Ukrainian use of U.S.-made long-range weapons. These weapons have about 190-mile range. So basically, these are U.S.-made, and what we often do is we give a nation weapons and then restrict how they use them. That's what's happened here up until now. But because Russia is deploying North Korean soldiers, the United States, Joe Biden, has given Ukraine permission to use the long-range attack weapons into Russia. So Russia launches these kind of weapons all the time against Ukraine. 120 missiles, 90 drones recently fired into Ukraine, largely against the Ukrainian power grid, killing civilians just at huge numbers. And so now Joe Biden has decided that Ukraine can use American-made weapons. These weapons are called Army Tactical Missile System. That's the technical name, but it's often in Army speak shortened down to ATACMS, ATACMS. That's literally how the word is used, that phrase is used when I talk to people from the Pentagon, some of the people who advise me and help me understand what's happening in military lore, military issues around the world. These Army Tactical Missile Systems, or short ATACMS, they have a range of about 190 miles, and so these will be fired into Russia. They will do a lot of damage. They are not nuclear, but they are very powerful. Already, Ukraine has been flying drones into Russia, often to try to scare people in the big cities. They will actually bomb installations that are way inside of Russia. They could fly drones all over Russia. They haven't done that yet, but they have taken out power systems. They have bombed some civilian installations. They have taken out military installations, and now they'll have even greater power to do it. There's almost no question that what has happened here is that Joe Biden, listening carefully to Donald Trump says when he gets in office, he's going to end the war, quote unquote, bring a swift end to the war, negotiate. He said, I'll negotiate a peace on the first day, he said, which of course we all know is not true. Nevertheless, he fully intends to end this war. So Joe Biden, fearing what Donald Trump might do, fearing that Donald Trump might cease to send American arms to Ukraine, might cease to back Ukraine, might have too much of a relationship going with Putin. We all have heard those rumors and allegations, been a big part of our politics. The fact is that Joe Biden decided to put into Trump's hands an escalation of the Russia-Ukraine war. So now Ukraine has permission from Joe Biden, this is a reversal of an earlier policy, has permission from Joe Biden to use these ATACMS missiles to fire into Russia. This is on top of the $56 billion that the United States has already spent. Now, I'm in favor of fighting Russia at the side of Ukraine. You know that. I've said it before in this podcast. I do not believe that this is a war that is the fault of the U.S. or Ukraine. I believe that Russia has been belligerent with Ukraine, has wanted a warm water port, believes that Ukraine ought to be part of Russia. Putin has made that very clear. And so as a result, I'm very much in favor of us supporting Ukraine. We've put a lot of money into that country. Wars are expensive, and yes, there may be some military-industrial complex manipulating of the system here, but that happens in every war. We can talk about that another time. So I'm fundamentally in favor of us supporting Ukraine, no question about it. I do think we have an obligation. Remember that I believe in the Christian just war theory. I do believe we have an obligation to limit civilian casualties, and we've done that pretty well. And Ukraine has used drones to let Russia know that they will bring the war to their front door. Just because they're large doesn't mean Ukraine can't drop a bomb in Moscow or wherever really they want to. So it's not bad to let them occasionally do this, but to do this now, to release Ukraine, to use American ATACMS missiles to fire into Russia now, is without question, yes, Joe Biden's answer to Russia using North Korean troops, but it is also handing Donald Trump a stink bomb. There's no question that him ratcheting up now, knowing that he will not have to field the results, but that Donald Trump will, in part in Joe Biden's very political, very devious kind of thinking, that's the kind of man he is handing Donald Trump, who he hates, like you just can't imagine how much, handing him a stink bomb to deal with as he steps into office, possibly queering a lot of other deals, a lot of other directions and initiatives that Joe Biden is not excited about for a Trump administration to take on. Now, What is scary about this is that Putin has responded exactly as we would expect him to. He has said, and I am quoting now, Russia will consider the possibility of using nuclear weapons when receiving reliable information about a massive launch of means of aerospace attack and their crossing of our state border. Let me pause real quick and say that often when you're reading the statement of a foreign leader that was given in a foreign language, the translation's bad. And this is the Russian news agency translation, and it's terrible. So basically what he's saying is Russia will use nuclear weapons in response to an aerospace attack of missiles crossing their border. Bad English, but you understand the point. So Putin has said, we'll respond with nuclear weapons if you're sending ATACMS across our border. And of course, Vladimir Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, is going to use those missiles if he can. What's happening here and what you have to understand is that wars go in cycles, especially in that part of the world, and there's not a lot of war that happens in the cold of winter, very little. So what they're doing right now, both sides, is trying to ratchet up their position and their intensity right before these terrible winters happen in that part of the world. Then things usually freeze in place, no pun intended, things usually freeze in place, and then they resume a little bit later, late winter, early spring. So we're hoping that all of this dies down. We're hoping that cooler heads prevail. But between Joe Biden, who has not been a very active president, has not been very engaged in a lot of things, has been slow to respond to anything, suddenly up and placing this order 10 weeks before Donald Trump takes the office, and as the Russians are threatening nuclear war, this is dangerous. This is really dangerous. And it's, by the way, not dangerous long term, frankly. It's going to be dangerous in the next 30 days because it's in the next 30 days, and I'm recording this on November 18th, it's in the next 30 days that this positioning prior to the winter freeze will take place. So we are in very dangerous times. And if nuclear weapons are used on the battlefield between Russia and Ukraine, and the U.S. continues to supply Ukraine at a heightened level, I wouldn't put it past Russia to drop a nuke somewhere. Now, by the way, realize you're not just talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki anymore, that level. That was atomic, of course, but you're not talking about that level of devastation. They probably would use tactical nukes, which means scaled to the battlefield. They do a lot of damage, and they're very scary. But you can drop one of those in some farmer's field in Germany, and you'll have all of Europe just up in arms and screaming at the U.S. So we're in very dangerous times. Nobody wants nuclear war. All-out nuclear war would wipe out entire nations and almost entire continents. But we have our nose pressed up against the possibility of a nuclear engagement, even by proxy, with Russia. Can you believe it? And the next 4 to 6 weeks is the critical time. Then winter kicks in, things lock down. There's a lot of talking trash, but not much happens for some months because the winters are so terribly severe. However, both Ukraine and Russia are attempting to knock out the power supplies of their enemies so that their enemies suffer during winter. And that's already happened to a great degree in Ukraine. Ukraine's trying to visit that on Russia. We are in some very strange times. So I know most Americans are paying attention to the latest appointments and what have you that Donald Trump is making and the statements that he's making and all the ratcheting up that's going to happen over the next months until he takes office. But let's keep our eye on the ball. Yes, what the Trump administration do and how it is staffed is important, but right now we're facing the possibility of a prelude to nuclear war. It's real. It's not just threat. Everybody has the capability to do it. And Joe Biden suddenly has awakened and seems ready to take the Ukraine-Russian war to a whole new level and then hand it to Donald Trump. Pray, keep your eye on the ball. Let's hope for good things.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.